Thank you all for hopping on. I'm Amanda Fories. I'm the managing partner here at Magnolia Market Access. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we have a monthly webinar series. We run them 10 months of the year. We give you Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays off from us because you'd rather be eating, I think, turkey and vacationing than hearing about market access those times of year. But our goal is to get together and just talk about interesting topics, what's going on in our industry, different ways of thinking about policy, pricing, reimbursement, health economics, real world evidence, just all the things that we dabble in here at the firm on a daily basis. This is not intended to be a sales pitch presentation at all. It's really for information sharing. If you have any questions and want to ask throughout, please feel free. You can just, and I think there's a Q&A or a chat section that you can submit questions. And today we are diving into the world of patient access. So we're going to talk through ways that you can build out and think about your patient support programs. And also there's just a lot of evolution in this space that I think we're going to talk to. So I will move us to the next slide. So I'm Amanda, as mentioned. I'll let each one of our team members introduce themselves. So Amanda, would you like to go first?
Hi, I'm Amanda O'Hore, Senior Vice President of Reimbursement and Market Access. We're looking forward to the discussion today.
Tracy?
Good morning, good afternoon. Tracy Baroni-Ullman, Vice President of Health Policy and Market Access.
And Jennifer?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Ellis, Senior Director, Market Access and Analytics.
Great. Okay. Well, what we'll talk through first today is on patient support, thinking through forecasting, not just if you're a new product on the market, but even if you're expanding your label, if you're doing something different with your program. There's also been a lot of changes in the insurance world that may change patient needs. We're also going to talk about patient support services models. We'll talk through a case study, and then we'll take some questions as we go. So great. I can hand it on over.
So if we look at the learning objectives today, we want to explain why patient support program forecasting is important and how the policy and environmental shifts may affect patient support programs. We can't see everything in our crystal ball, but we know that changes are always on the horizon, and we know that some things that are set today may not be set by the time you launch. Describe the components of a foundational model for patient support services and identify where customization can be applied, why it adds value, and then it'll be up to you to think about what value it adds to you and is it worth that customization and that cost to you and your business. And then showcasing a real-world case study to connect model design choices to patient and program outcomes, and that's when Jen will jump in and share her expertise with us.
All right. I think we're going to do a little poll here. So this is now, again, testing my wizardry on Zoom. So we're going to go to the first question today. I'm going to launch a poll, and it is going to ask you, what is your biggest concern about implementing or expanding a patient support program? So the poll is open. It's like my favorite thing to do is to see the responses come in. All right. Okay, we'll give it just one more second. Is everyone on pins and needles like I am, ready to see the results here? All right, I'm going to end the poll now. It looks like we're hitting saturation here in terms of responses. So great. Okay, so what we have learned is that from everyone here that has joined, we got pretty good response rate. Thank you. 41% of you had mentioned operational complexity. That is one of your, or that is your biggest concern. Then 33% of you said costs. 26% of you said patient and HCP engagement, and nobody said the design of the service. So great. Okay, next slide.
Next slide, Amanda, please. Can we go to the next slide? Are we stuck? There we go. All right. So, whenever we think about forecasting, we need to think about it from a couple of different ways. And the first would be access, obviously. And then the second is how do we think about it from a budgeting perspective? It matters that you forecast because you know that patient support programs are going to represent a significant ongoing investment across the product lifestyle. So recognizing where you are when you enter and how that's going to change over the next, say, 1 to 5 years, and then even after that. And some of this depends on the competitive environment. Some of it depends on insurance design. Some of it depends on how your patient population flows out because you can certainly do a payer scope and a payer landscape whenever you launch, but that could change as your product gets additional indications or as the marketplace changes. Design choices and health policy, other environmental factors can influence who gets supported, the services you want to offer, how quickly therapy starts, the total program spend, and really almost everything in between. Recognizing that your budget may change, but understanding some of the parameters that are going to change that result in your budget changing and the assumptions that you make at the beginning are going to be important. The closer your assumptions are at the start, the better you're going to be in the long run. And then finally, forecasting improves resource allocation and reduces surprises. That's something that everybody from the CEO to finance to the brand will appreciate. Forecasting enables us to say the what if scenarios. Will there be Medicare for all as a policy shift, for example? Will payers begin to include higher deductibles, or will they have more coinsurance than cost sharing? And what does that do to the affordability and access for your product? Looking at your trade-offs across equity, affordability, and financial exposure. And that's not only health equity and SDOH equity, but also equity across payers and plans and how you make sure that certain patients aren't disadvantaged based on the type of plan they have and the type of program you put into place. And then finally, aligning across cross-functional teams on one set of assumptions. Gaining agreement is key, and reminding everybody as you go on what you had agreed to and why is going to be important. And it will be necessary. These discussions go on for months, and it's easy to have changes in people who are involved on the team. Changes in assumptions are fine, but understanding how you got to that first set and why they evolved is important. Next slide, please. We know that policy and industry shifts are reshaping patient support. Higher deductibles and coinsurance and changing out-of-pocket dynamics across the spectrum of commercial and Affordable Care Act ACA plans is probably one of the biggest drivers of not just the need for patient support programs, but also changes in the parameters of patient support programs. Prior authorization and step edits, this is becoming a bigger factor in patient access. We see in claims reviews that expensive drugs, even first-in-class drugs, are seeing significant wait times to therapy, and that may be a reason, say, to put in place a bridge program if that's what you expect, or if you know that competitors are experiencing this within a certain space, then maybe you expect that and you put that into place just to make sure that you have that bridge available. Channel and formulary changes alter pull through and really kind of leapfrog over to who's involved and who should be interested in this and making sure that you keep your providers informed. And then finally, there are various changes within coverage that are going to make a difference in how many people you have who are insured, uninsured, have less insurance than they may have otherwise. LIS changes are just one of those, and they will make people more fully insured and yet Medicaid work requirements and Medicaid unwinding will give you more people who are uninsured and who will really need more than just patient support, but really a PAP type program. Everybody's favorite topic is copay accumulators, maximizers, and AFPs. When we think about where we are with copay assistance or with copay accumulators and maximizers currently, we know that 25 states will currently prohibit or, sorry, so let's say that differently. 25 states require the plans to allow copay accumulators and maximizers and count them toward the patient's out-of-pocket and deductible. The problem is that those 25 state laws only include 17% of the insured population because they don't cover the self-funded plans. Looking at utilization can shift the timing and magnitude, and program rules are going to need payer-specific guardrails. The one thing to recognize with accumulators and maximizers is that in the 2020 Notice of Benefit and Payment Parameters rule that CMS puts out to try to explain what the marketplace looks like, they required that copay accumulators and maximizers not be allowed and that the deductibles be addressed and included, that the money for the copay card would be included in the deductibles and the out-of-pocket. This has not changed despite several lawsuits, but what we need to do now is get rules in place. And every year when the NBPP comes out, those rules have not been included. And so there's not really a lot of enforcement. And so it could be that there are plans that are not counting the copay money toward the patient's deductibles and cost sharing. And then finally, looking at new pathways and policies, direct-to-consumer programs via Trump RX and other programs may really change the way discount channels and patient support programs are needed. We know that public policy uncertainty can drive changes in the services offered and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do within patient support programs. State level upper payment limits, when the states have prescription drug affordability boards, they're going to assign upper payment limits for state regulated plans within that state. Are those drugs even going to be available in that state after the creation of a UPL? And if not, what do you want to do about it via your patient support program, if anything? And then the non-renewal of the enhanced ACA tax credits, Medicaid work requirements, the unwinding of Medicaid, and other types of changes within the market are going to drive the uninsured population, again, creating a different type of need where maybe it's not so much copay assistance, but it's more PAP and free drug. Next slide, please.
Sure. Tracy, before you go on, I have a question for you on this one. So I know we're looking at all these different ways that they're trying to cut drug costs, right? We're seeing every policy on earth out there right now being kind of thrown at us with most favored nation. We've seen the negotiation under IRA. A lot of those things intend to cut the drug price, but we still talk about an affordability issue. We now have an out-of-pocket cap in Medicare for patients. Most patients are seeing reductions or should see on the Medicare side some reductions in costs with the negotiation. Do you think we're still going to reach a point, though, where we're going to say, okay, we have to do more than just PAP Medicare patients? Could you see a place where we would start wanting to do, or the government might consider some type of copay card or like patient type rebates or anything else to alleviate patient costs at the pharmacy counter? Or do you think that drug companies will be kind of pushed to open up their PAP criteria more? Do you think more stuff will go to out of pocket or just like straight up buying on Trump RX? Like, how do you think we're going to keep pushing patients can't afford while we're continuing to cut drug prices? And where are we going to kind of find that middle point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. And I think there are a lot of factors that play into this. Whenever the IRA created the $2,000 maximum out of pocket, I think that there was a belief that this takes care of all Medicare patients' problems with cost sharing, right? And I think that's not true. But what we know it did do is make things more expensive for the plans and put the standalone PDPs at financial risk. And you see fewer of those available to patients. You see the premium demo that CMMI put out. And I think that those types of changes to rescue the PDPs may lead you to believe that perhaps CMS decides that the anti-kickback statute isn't really that big of a deal because we've said for years this is a quasi public-private program within Part D. And so if you were to say, if you have a standalone plan, then you can have this type of assistance. via a copay card, that would certainly ease some of the burden. But would it be enough for the plans, and would there be a way to justify it? I think that the thing that we've learned within this administration in the short time that they have been working through these programs is that nothing is actually off limits. And so them ruling out that the anti-kickback statute does not apply to Medicare Part D, to me, does not seem to be a big stretch. So it actually could happen, whereas for literally 2 decades, I don't think anybody thought it ever would happen, even though the discussions pop up every few years.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that that when you look at 2 years ago, the cap was $2,000. By next year, it's supposed to be 2,400. That's just an additional price pressure on patients that, the Medicare population is a very vocal population as well. Yeah, I think there could be at least some serious conversation about, providing additional types of assistance to the Medicare population because of that. Because it's, like I said, that's a huge jump in cost to the patient.
Absolutely. Thanks. Appreciate that.
And so when we think about how we travel through the patient support program landscape, you have to start with, who do you want to provide this assistance and support to? And so looking at federal poverty level thresholds and other coverage rules, I know that some manufacturers are looking into asset tests. Some of them are looking at other income sources, thinking through making sure that the people who need it most have access, and then also thinking about, do you want to have exception processes to allow other people in under certain conditions? What types of services are you going to need to offer? A lot of this can depend on, are you entering the market as a first in class? Are there other classes that are similar that could be compared? If you're not a first in class, what's being offered within the competitive marketplace? Are there bridge programs? Do you have the ability to pay for travel if you're a cell and gene therapy and there are only certain sites that can do the administration and the follow-up? These types of things may require special permission from CMS or HHS, and certainly have to be thought through and determine whether or not all patients are available to that type of extended support, or just people within the certain income level that you define. Looking at out-of-pocket exposure by channel is very important. I know that one of the things that we think about is that, well, Medicare patients have a Part D maximum, but they don't have an inpatient maximum. The ACA does have inpatient maximums, and so do commercial plans, but they're very, very high. If you've been tracking the ACA since its inception, they go up each year, and they're now over $20,000. And so, is there a way to help these patients at the level of the patient support programs, or do they really have to turn to other entities and foundations to get that help? Making sure that you have that program ready to go and that providers know about it, to decrease the time to therapy, to help them understand that, yes, it's likely you're going to have a delay. Yes, you're going to have to go through certain prior authorization and other utilization management. And we want to make it easier for you to jump in at the beginning when you decide that this is the right product for your patient, and get your patient the drug while you're through our program, the assistance they need through our program while you're working through the insurance process as well. And then finally, looking at operations and budget. Again, it's so important to understand that everybody wants to be involved in this, and there's going to be changes as you go, documenting why you make the decisions you make, why you think 6 months after your original forecast, you think there will be fewer patients or greater need to assist patients, explaining that and getting agreement as you continue to forecast and move toward launch is going to be important. Also important if you have new indications coming to market, you might have different needs because of second and third indications and differences in that patient population. Next slide, please. And finally, it's important to understand that everybody benefits from forecasting and being as accurate as possible. We know that finance will appreciate forecasting. It can be months and months of discussions, talking to patient services and hub operations, understanding their ability to kind of tweak the program as you go, understanding what the budget is going to be for that, and then really working with market access, HEOR, and brand leadership to gather agreement on why certain parameters are appropriate, what the services are that are available, what happens to the people who would not be included in patient support programs. So, for instance, copay cards can't be used within Part D. Is there a commitment to an independent charitable copay foundation that would allow you to assist those patients? And how does that fit into that forecast? Program partners, the ICCFs that I just mentioned, looking at the specialty and hub partners and how they can work with you to understand what your priorities are, what your parameters are, when they should reach out to you if things aren't working, if there are delays, if there's many people who are just over the income limit, understanding that and how that plays out. Do patients get access or not is important so that you can correct your forecasting as you move forward. And then finally, looking at affordability gaps, whether it's people who were previously insured and have a temporary or even a long-term loss of insurance, understanding that providers and clinical staff need predictability. They need to understand if you make a change in your program, if your program is new, what are the parameters? I know that sometimes manufacturers are reluctant to share information on what the upper income limit is, for example. If you do that, if that's your choice to not share that income limit, then it creates confusion in the physician's offices because they have some people who they think should qualify who aren't, and others who do qualify that they don't think should have, and eventually they just get frustrated and stop using the program. So really making sure that you make it clear, not just during forecasting, but afterwards, how the provider groups can apply and what they can expect to get back from a patient assistance perspective. And then working with patient advocacy organizations to understand the needs outside of copay assistance, because copay assistance is pretty much a given. But what other support services do they hear from their patients would be helpful? Next slide, please. And so our next poll question is, which of the policy or environmental factors listed do you believe will have the biggest influence on patient support program design? Accumulator maximizer programs that are clearly never going to go away, decreases in Medicaid and ACA enrollment, creating more uninsured patients, federal pricing reform, whether it's MFN or something else, or greater use of direct to consumer, which means fewer drugs on the formulary, but yet patients may not be able to pay cash at DTC.
Responses are flying in. We'll give it
I can't see those. We need to do it so that we can see them.
It's so fun to like watch the little thing. Clearly working from home has had its effect on me. I get excited about little things like this. All right. It looks like we got just a couple more check on in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the poll. All right, 48% of you, which I'm very proud as a policy person, said federal pricing reform, which is like keeping me up at night. So I feel very, very honored that was something other people are feeling, that yes, we're in this together. Okay, cool. So it's 48% federal pricing reform, 30% accumulator maximizer programs, 17% said decreases in Medicaid and ACA enrollment, and 4% said greater use of DTC. Are you able to see the results now? It popped up. Okay, great. There you go. For those of you that were on our first webinar where Zoom kept like cutting out every 6 seconds to now where we have polls, we have come a very long way in a few years. So we're very proud of ourselves and our sophistication here. Okay, great. All right, we'll go on to the next thing. So
I think I'll turn it over to Amanda.
There you go, Amanda.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And thank you for sharing some of those environmental factors. So we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about more specifically what are the considerations for the model as you are either developing your own or working with somebody to help develop a model so that you can do as accurate a forecast as you possibly can. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's really important to start with, and I think Tracy covered some of this, like what is the model and what does it do? And I think first and foremost, I want to stress that this is a data-driven tool. This is not a back of the envelope calculation. This is not a swag. This is something where you're really looking at the best data that you have to help you forecast. And that data input can really consider a lot of different factors, including what is your specific patient population and what are the needs of that population. What are the payer requirements? Where does this product fit in those payer benefit designs? Is it a medical benefit drug? Is it an inpatient drug? Is it something you get from the pharmacy? Are there other services that you need to include as part of this, like travel assistance or caregiver assistance? So there are a lot of different factors that really are determined by your specific patient population and what their needs are. And then also, where are you setting all of your boundaries and your program rules that will affect things like what is your enrollment criteria? What do you think your utilization will be? What are the costs for all of these services? So that you can assess how is that really going to affect the overall effectiveness of your program. And then in some instances, does that affect patient outcome as well? A couple other things to keep in mind when you're designing a model are, is this repeatable? So when you're creating a model, if you need to make adjustments or tweaks or test different scenarios, so to get at those what if questions, well, what if I change my enrollment? What if program criteria changes? What if payer coverage changes? What if there's some other kind of policy issue that comes into play or is enacted by Congress and this current administration? What are those kinds of changes? How is that going to impact my forecast? To allow you to really adjust and shift to, looking at different scenarios and being able to have those kinds of forecasting changes. So if we go to the next slide, the tool that you're building really is a strategic piece of your broader design for your brand, because in a lot of cases, your patient support services is a huge part of takes up a huge part of the budget brand or the brand budget. So you want to make sure that you're reflecting those costs in your budget and you're doing that forecasting as accurately as possible to really quantify how you're setting up your program in terms of, the services offered and to the best you can. Look at the external forces, and a lot of those are outside of your control, but you can monitor them and look at, what is your competition doing? What does your payer mix suggest in terms of, payer coverage and benefit design? And then, as I had mentioned, you really want to make this transparent and something that you can replicate and transition and change if you need to for other teams. So Tracy had mentioned in her segment, hey, there are other folks within the company that may want to look at this, like your finance team, like your CEOs, in addition to just the hub team itself, that you want to make sure that your program can be viewed and easily understood by those other players. And then where does it fit and when is the optimal time to start doing some of this forecasting? Certainly pre-launch is kind of where most people's minds go, like before you even send out an RFP or before you've determined what your program criteria should be, you doing some of this forecasting so that you can gauge, okay, I think based on this population and these are the services that I want to have. But as we all know, we're under budget constraints. So what's realistic? What can I afford to provide? So certainly in that pre-launch phase, I think it's extremely important to do this type of modeling and forecasting. I know a lot of us are now in or beginning that annual planning phase. And again, given the significance of the investment that you've likely made in your patient support services, looking at and reevaluating what your services are and what your program is offering. And, are you on, were you on target? Did something change that we need to realign as part of our annual planning process? And then finally, certainly there are things that are changing. So if you had a new competitor enter the market, if you had some type of major coverage shift occur, if there is a policy issue that's now being implemented that could affect your patient support services, doing this type of modeling to respond and forecast based on those changes, I think is also important. So if you go to the next slide, we start looking at some of the inputs for creating a model. And at a baseline, those are things like, what's your payer mix? Who are the key payers that will cover your patient population? And what percentage of your patient population do you think will be covered by those different payer segments? So when we look at Medicare, Medicaid, commercial payers, but there could be other self-pay, the VA, other segments that you might want to account for as well, depending on your patient population. How big is your patient population? Is this a rare disease? Is this something that's more in general medicine? So some of these patient populations can be extremely big and some of them can be very small. And you'll see in that center bucket, it's not just the size of your patient population, but what are you predicting the utilization of your program to be? So of that patient population, do you have a mandatory hub? Do you anticipate everyone having to go through your hub, or can people not go through your hub and still get access? Can they go directly to the SPs, for example, in your network? Another consideration in your modeling is, what's your product price? And are there any other services that go along with that, like monitoring or nursing services or travel costs that you need to account for that you're going to potentially be offering in your program? And what are the costs of those services? What are the services you're actually offering? Is it patient support? Is it reimbursement support? Is it copay assistance? Is it bridge? Is it quick start? There are a lot of different services that you can potentially offer. And what are the costs associated with each of those in terms of administrative costs, salary of employees, the actual cost of goods? Those kinds of things can be part of that. And then finally, looking at, what are your competitors offering? A lot of patients are looking at products and services that are being offered. And do you want to offer your patients something that's on par with what your competitors are doing? Or do you want to offer something that's better? And if you offer something better, again, what's the cost of doing that? And then other things that factor into your model include where you set your program eligibility criteria in terms of, I think the biggest one, of course, is patient income, but there can be some other factors you might want to take a look at with regards to eligibility as well. Program selection in terms of what services that you're offering. I'd mentioned the utilization and participation rates of your patient population in your program. Timing assumptions in terms of how long are you going to be offering your support services to patients. Do you have a partial year? So maybe you're launching your product mid-year or at the end of the year, so you have just a partial year of services. So you want to take that into consideration in terms of your forecasting, and then being able to really toggle through those scenarios real time as you see things shifting during your launch and throughout the product's life cycle. And then your model may have multiple outputs. So these certainly look at things like forecasting what's the potential enrollment and utilization of the services by your patients, what's the cost per patient to offer these services, but also what's the total program spend. And we usually look at that year over year. And then finally, what's the overall impact of offering these services to the brand's overall budget? So I'll turn it over to Jennifer to kind of walk through some more details that go into the model.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. So Amanda did a good job of providing a good overview of the different components of the modeling. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail, kind of step by step on what that all looks like. And then we have a few slides to help you visualize some of the different inputs and the outputs as well. So here is a nice graphic just kind of laying out the key categories that we look at when we do our model for the data inputs. And that includes like details about the patient population, insurance benefit design, what are the out-of-pocket costs for patients in each design, depending on the payer, can be different. We have product information, can include the dosing schedule and their therapy design, and then also includes like the program administration costs, what that looks like as well. So then in addition, we also, like Amanda said, the payer mix is very important to include in your analysis to start as a good baseline to kind of understand what your patient population looks like. And then, of course, the product costs and attributes are also very important as well as the patient income. And the last bucket here, we have the policy side of things. So there could be things coming up that can change what your modeling might look like. And so it's important to create a model that can be customizable so that you can build in these other aspects as well. So on the next slide, we lay out some examples of the different types of programs that can be modeled through forecasting. And so this can include, as we've mentioned, patient support programs that are for the free drug program. We have the copay assistance program, usually for patients with commercial insurance. There can also be bridge or quick start programs, which are the temporary free drug programs to assist patients while their coverage is being established. We've also mentioned the independent copay support, as well as there could be support around hub operations where additional operational support can be provided, as well as things like helping to identify patients. And then, of course, there could be new models coming out, as we mentioned, the DTC programs, as well as potential caregiver aid or other things as well. So these patient support programs have become increasingly more complex over time and often consist of multiple services working together to address the different barriers. So, for example, a manufacturer might have a bridge start program for patients to help them get started on product, but the eventual goal potentially is to get them onto the commercial copay program. So these two programs can be forecasted together and should be, because that patient population could overlap and we don't want to over count or double count patients. So it's important to consider these different types of programs together in your modeling as well. So all of these programs also can serve different functions, and it may be affected differently by the changes in external environments. So another thing to keep in mind is it's important to know that not every organization is going to need every program. So it's important to think about what the patient population needs are and how it can change over different therapeutic areas as well. So on the next slide, we talk about customization across the key inputs. So once you have a foundational model, this is where we can build in the customizations to address specific questions that can be helpful for the planning process. So different organizations may have different objectives depending on the needs of the organization, as well as their specific patient population. So for example, some may be looking to change eligibility criteria, while others might be assessing their copay benefit levels or the potential impact on policy changes. So as the level of impact for each of these factors will vary depending on the specific patient population. So instead of creating a model that just looks at very specific parameters for a program, it's maybe more helpful to include some customizable levers that can be updated based on the changing of those levers. So this is where the competitive benchmarking that we've talked about that can also be really useful. So competitive benchmarking is basically looking to see, how other organizations are structuring their patient support programs, and then using that information to provide some context when evaluating the different designs. So this is especially helpful when you're about to launch a program for the first time or entering a new market. So the value of including customization is that it allows organizations to test the different assumptions and also evaluate potential outcomes before making the actual changes in the real world. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the different types of inputs that can come out of the modeling. So there are the two big buckets, which are the demand and utilization, and then the potential financial impact. So for demand and utilization bucket, this is basically summarizing the forecasted volume of patients in different ways. So this can be cut by year, quarter, as well as by payer type and program type. And then for financial impact, this is more focused on the cost of implementing the program. So this is looking at total overall program exposure as well as per patient costs. And this can also be looked at over a time period as well as by payer and by program as well. So in addition to all the different ways to report this information, it's also possible to look at the results when changing various customization or input levers, as we talked about previously. So for example, you could change the program eligibility criteria or benefit design or creating a new lever for a policy change. And so the finance part of the forecast are usually what is most visible, but they're not the only part of the picture. And it's important to understand enrollment, utilization patterns, the timing of demand. All of this is also really important as well. And it's also important to be flexible enough to address different stakeholders. So preparing the results and outputs specific to the group that you're working with. So for example, the finance team might be more interested in looking at the budget impacts, while patient services may be more interested in enrollment volume or operational capacity. So in the next slide, or in a couple of slides, we'll go through a case study to kind of talk through what this looks like. But on this slide, we have some examples of questions that financial forecasting can help answer, just to give you another way to kind of think about the kinds of questions and insights and results that can come out of financial modeling. So it really can be a range of things that could be looked at, from patient eligibility to impacts to changes in the payer mix, as well as the policy changes affecting patient cost sharing. So there could be a lot of different things. This is just a snapshot of the types of questions that could be answered through the modeling. So it's also important to know that many of these questions are also very interconnected. So a change in design to improve patient access may increase utilization, but can also affect operational requirements as well as the overall spend. So because you change a requirement in one program, it means that something else has to happen in the other programs potentially. So then you really have to think about the potential trade-offs of the different changes that you make as well. Okay. And then I think we have another polling question. So now that we've kind of talked through all of the different inputs, we just wanted to know what you think would be the most difficult for your organization to forecast accurately. Would it be the patient volume and therapy uptake, program participation and utilization, the payer mix and coverage dynamics, or the operational and administrative costs?
All right, we'll give it a second. All right. It looks like we have pretty equal responses in terms of program participation, utilization, and payer mix and coverage dynamics. And then a couple people responded on patient volume, therapy uptake, and 9% on operational and administrative costs.
Yes, so this is all, yes, can be very challenging, especially when you have multiple people on different teams with different information. Sometimes it can be hard to get that information. But even though there could be like gaps in information as well, this type of modeling can really help with testing assumptions and evaluating potential outcomes under different scenarios.
Okay.
Well, okay. So we can go to the case study. So this is an example to illustrate how these concepts all come together. So this is an example involving program design changes and competitive benchmarking. So for this example, the manufacturer was preparing to launch a copay program in a therapeutic area with several established competitors. But before finalizing the program, they wanted to look at the competitive landscape and then the potential implications of different design choices. So the first, what they did first was evaluate the existing programs in the market, including looking at eligibility requirements, annual support caps, and enrollment approaches. So then these findings help provide some context for developing potential program designs. And then the model was used to estimate participation, utilization, and financial impact under each of the different scenarios. And then this allowed the organization to evaluate the implications of the different program structures before launch and before making a decision on next steps. So on the next few slides, we do have some results, but I do want to mention that it is just a snapshot of the type of results that can come out of financial modeling, as we've discussed previously. But we just wanted to simplify it just so you can kind of see how this looks in a very specific example. So on the next slide, we just have a little bit more detail about the different program designs that we looked at. And then the benchmarking was really what helped establish what currently is in the market to use as one of the scenarios, and then creating scenarios around that to test the different assumptions. And then, excuse me, so the focus on this was to look at the eligibility criteria, so the federal poverty limit levels, and then the annual caps, so looking at different points for the annual caps. And on the next slide, we have the results. Example of what the results may look like. So we projected the number of patients for each scenario and then the associated program costs. So the results shown here is just for the combined 3 years that we looked at, but we could have also shown the results by year as well. And then the analysis shows that increasing the level of support available to patients did increase projected program investment, but that magnitude of the increase was smaller than expected. So the recommendation here was to launch with the most generous design and then revisit this again later after some time has passed with the program being out. And then the ultimate goal here really isn't to define like the exact perfect program, but really to give the decision makers insights into what the structure could look like, what the costs and the number of patients would look like, given the different types of scenarios, and really thinking through the trade-offs of each one. So really just helping to start the conversation and help to make decisions on their program design. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda O to discuss some other considerations and review some key takeaways.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. If you go to the next slide, they're just in terms of kind of wrapping things up. Certainly, we've talked about what goes into some more of the traditional models in forecasting, but there's some other things to consider as well when you're creating your forecasting and looking at your patient support services design. As Tracy mentioned, we talked about this quite a lot. This is Part D redesign and the out-of-pocket cap. So when we look at how might that affect your decision to, do we keep Medicare Part D patients in our PAP? Do we try and transition them out? As we start looking at changes in that program's design and the costs that are associated with that to the patient, is that something that you might want to consider doing, or do we still think that that's really not feasible to have a patient? Are their costs really still not feasible for them to afford? All of the ongoing regulation, legislation, lawsuits related to accumulators, maximizers, and then the alternate plan finder, programs that are out there. What are the outcomes of some of those decisions going to be on the support services and the costs associated with them? Certainly, we continue to see patients shift from plan to plan. They go from being commercially insured to having government insurance. They go from self-insured to fully funded patient to plans. So there can be a lot of churn there within your specific population that you might need to account for. Then what happens when there is a change and either in the environment or in your competitive environment where you really need to activate some kind of campaign to raise awareness of affordability issues? So how would that impact the spend? And then finally, last but not least is certainly the incorporation of artificial intelligence into your program. So we're seeing emerging use cases for AI in patient services that could impact things like the cost of doing business. So it could impact those types of costs for operating your program. But there can also be some additional benefits that AI brings to the patient support services model, which can impact your patient experience. So we're seeing uses of AI to do things like improve potentially patient enrollment and eligibility screening, having chatbots available 24/7. So if patients have questions, they can interact with those types of programs. Improving the analytic capabilities and reporting options for the users and the counselors associated with the program. So, are there additional metrics that AI can help determine if your program's, being run as efficiently as possible? So there's a lot of potential, I think, for AI. And how do you maximize those operational efficiencies and enhancements that AI can potentially bring? And ultimately, what will that do to the costs of operating your program and the services that you're able to provide? If you move to the next slide, we're going to round it out here and just hopefully bring home some of the conclusions that we hope you take away from this. In terms of, this type of modeling and forecasting is really essential because the environment, as we've discussed, is not going to remain static. It's going to be changing, whether it's changes in lawsuit, changes in health policy, changes in the types of services that you're able to provide and that you might want to provide. And having this type of foundational model that can link program levers to really help you identify what is your financial exposure and the impact on patient outcomes, I think is going to be important. Making sure that your model is customized for your specific environment and patient population is crucial so that you're really modeling out real world scenarios that you might encounter and that you can adjust as you need to over time. And then finally, having those case studies and scenarios available, again, that you can look at and forecast and adjust and just account for changes as the product goes through its life cycle, I think is also going to be important. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Amanda to talk about our webinar topic for next month.
Yeah, I'll do that. And we did have one question come in. So when we were talking about affordability earlier, somebody did ask about what's the difference with kind of what the patient's going to see in terms of affordability versus what's happening behind the scenes. So we know in some of these cases, there's going to be rebates made. So a patient might not necessarily, or 340B, right? A 340B patient goes into the hospital. They don't know that they're a 340B patient. The drug discount happens after the fact, right? Or they're paying their full cost share on the full price of the drug, but there's a discount happening. So 340B isn't like a direct going to a 340B hospital doesn't save you as the patient money or help with affordability. This person was curious, like, what is actually currently going to help patients save money in terms of policy? Like when we think of drug price negotiation, if we think of, I think Trump RX is a great example that does put the drug and make it cheaper at the point of sale where the patient gets it. They're just kind of curious about what some of the avenues are for patients in terms of like the policies that are going on right now and where they're going to see the patient saving money, not just money shifting hands in the back.
I mean, I can start with that, but I think everybody probably has ideas. I do think that some of the PBM regulations, whether it's the federal law around Part D or whether it's state laws and switching PBMs to more of a fee-based service, facetiously, you could say they're going to collect just as much in fees as they do in rebates. I think that would be hard to imagine. So it won't be exactly a one for one. So there should be more free money there in the system, but there should also be some ability to pass through the discounts directly to the employer who can lower cost sharing to the pharmacy, to the patient ultimately. I think that's a big opportunity. I also think that there's a whole movement toward biosimilars and biosimilar use at the time the first one comes to market. You can see it in the recent RFI released by the Senate Democrats. You hear about it whenever Health Affairs writes an article about where are there opportunities. So I think that utilization there really makes a difference. Other than that, I think it's pretty difficult because some of this is run by employers, and I don't know how much they understand about the money in the back versus the money in the front because all they see is the overall costs.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to that. I think one of the, when you look at something like the cap on Part D, that is a known factor to help patients where they're knowing where they can figure out what their liability is going to be. But when you look at other sites of care and the payment systems that are used there, if you're paying 20%, if your coinsurance is 20% of the allowed amount, whatever the hospital's paying for the drug doesn't really matter. The patient's paying 20% of the allowed amount. Now, over time, when you look at things like ASP pricing and things like that, eventually they will be affected by different pricing calculations, but some of the cheapest prices are excluded from those types of calculations. So the patient may not actually see a change in what they're paying. And I think somebody made a comment in the chat a little earlier that, a lot of those co-insurances are calculated before any discounts are taken. And I agree with that. So what it's actually saving the patient and a lot of these drug pricing, discount programs and things like that, it's not super clear if it's actually going to save the patient a lot, at least in the immediate future.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yep. All right. So that was the one question that came in. And yeah, just to talk about next month. So I think just kind of hitting mid-year, there's quite a few things coming up in the policy world that I think will affect everybody, including an RFI from the Democrats on how should we lower drug prices and spark innovation. So there's some stuff there going on. Lots of things. GUARD has been sitting at the OMB. So we're waiting to see when that gets released and if that's going to be finalized. Globe is not there yet. We're waiting to find out, let's see, iPay 2027, iPay 2028 listed. I mean, just so much stuff going on. Also that moiety, we saw that change potentially in going back to the way you're going to count moiety in terms of negotiating drugs. So I think we've just seen a huge amount of little tidbits coming out. 340B is coming back to the issue. Are we going to move to a 340B rebate model? So just all those little fun things. We're going to have kind of a back and forth little fireside chat. Maybe we'll light up some flames behind us for that one on our screen. But please join us next month and hopefully we'll see you all then. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.